Hi, you're watching Saturday in the Woodworking Shop with Andrew Pitts, where we talk things woodworking. Now, I received a question about case hardening of wood. Case hardening, despite the name, has nothing to do with hardness of wood. It has to do with stresses that get into the wood during the drying process and cause the wood to react after you cut the planks open. And before we talk about that specifically, let's talk just a little bit more about how wood dries. I've got two sponges here. This one's dry. It just came out of the dryer, nice and compact. This represents a piece of wood that is oven dry. There's no water in it. The cells are empty. The cell walls are not saturated. This sponge represents a living tree. It's dripping water, and sometimes when you mill a log, it really does drip water. Now, if I squeeze this sponge and get all the water out of the cell cavities, so that the only water left is in the cell walls, this represents a piece of wood that is removed all its free water, and it's about 30% moisture content. Can't squeeze it to get any more water out of it. Okay, now, this is the point at which further drying will cause this sponge to shrink until it finally gets down to the size of this. These are two identical sponges, by the way, except this one's dry, this one is saturated in the cell walls. So as this sponge dries, it eventually gets small like this. Okay, now with that understood, let's talk about case hardening. I've got a piece of red oak here, and if I put this into the kiln to dry, it's going to dry from the outside. The water will escape as vapor from the outside. And when that happens, the outside of this board is going to try to shrink down like this sponge. But the inside of the board is still wet, like this sponge, or like this sponge was before I put it back into the bucket of water, like this. So the outside wants to get like this, the inside is going to stay like this until it dries out. That's the key. When that happens, the outside of the cells can't shrink down, and so the outside ends up taking a set, which is in the expanded state. Now, as the inside continues to dry, it tries to shrink down. But guess what? The outside is already set in the expanded state, and I've drawn big circles here representing big fat cells. The inside tries to shrink, it can't because the outside's already set, and now I've got a board that is technically dry, but there's a lot of stress in it. The outside cells are trying to be compressed as the inside cells in tension are trying to shrink the board down. That's case hardening. Okay, why is that bad? Well, imagine you take this board and you resaw it right in half. Now you've removed half of this board and all the compression cells on the one side. What do you have left? You got a board where you have a bunch of tension here trying to shrink it, and a bunch of compression here trying to expand it, and the board cups. The resaw board cups. And that's the problem with case hardening. Same thing would happen if I just tried to plane down one side and got rid of all these cells that are under compression. The board would cup. Now, when you're drying in a solar kiln, it's tough to get rid of all the case hardening. Even though the moisture builds up in the kiln at night and tends to relieve the stresses some, you still end up with some case hardening. In a commercial kiln that's heated with steam, what they do, near the end of the drying cycle, they inject hot steam, high temperature, for a short period of time, resaturate these outside fibers, and then let the board dry. And by doing that, they're able to counteract the compression that's in these cells. I like to think of it, and maybe this isn't technically accurate, I like to think of it that they put some heat and steam in the outside cells, it relaxes them, gets the whole board to come back to a natural relaxed state where the tensions are all relieved. It helps me to think that way, and hey, that's my story, I'm sticking with it. So case hardening is something where in a solar kiln you're going to have some of it. You got to kind of mill your lumber a little larger than you expect. You know you're going to have to take it down some to get the cup out of the boards after you resaw. It's just a fact of life. I live with it. Case hardening is something that just doesn't go away on its own. Now that board I've been using in my description, that's been sitting in my shop for about a year after the kiln drying was complete. So I've cut off just a little length of that board, and I'm going to go ahead and resaw that and see if there's any case hardening in that particular piece. So you can see on this piece that after resawing, the piece is cupped. Each side cupped a little bit, meaning there was compression stress in the outside and tension stress on the inside. And by resawing that, I took away the compression stress on the other side, and all you had then is tension and compression. And the pieces that were being compressed then relaxed by spreading out some, and the piece cupped a little bit, as you can see again when I put the two pieces together.